Imagine this. You open the door of an abandoned trailer deep in the Ural wilderness and find a table set for three, with hot food steaming in bowls while fresh logs crackle in the corner stove. You're alone for hundreds of miles, the nearest settlement 4 hours away on broken winter roads, yet there's hot potatoes and meat on the table, as if someone just stepped out and will return any moment. Today I'll tell you the true story of a logger who encountered something that old-timers in Ural villages only whisper about after their third shot of vodka. This encounter changed his life forever, but not the way you might think. What happened that February night in 1998 will make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about the boundaries of our world. Because sometimes, deep in the wild forest, there are places where different rules apply. Places you shouldn't enter after dark. Places where ancient powers still remember old agreements. And woe to anyone who breaks these unspoken laws without knowing the price of their words.
The harsh Ural winter of 1998. An experienced logger named Mikhail was preparing for another trip to the most remote section of forest. 2,500 square kilometers of wild taiga, where the nearest settlement was 250 kilometers away as the crow flies. In 15 years working timber operations, he'd seen everything. Bears emerging from hibernation too early, poachers hiding in forest cabins. But what awaited him this time went beyond any human experience. Even the old taiga wolves he worked alongside had never mentioned anything like it, though what old man, Vasily Petrovich, had once hinted after a sauna that something dwells in the northern logging areas, something better left alone. He spoke vaguely, avoided direct answers, but his eyes held such seriousness that Mikhail remembered that conversation. At the time, though, he dismissed it as old man's tales and moonshine. Now he regretted not asking for details, but it was too late.
Fresh snow fell that morning, the temperature dropping to -30, and the old Ural truck started on the second try, practically a miracle in such weather. Perfect conditions for a week-long shift in the far sector, where he needed to check temporary structures and mark new areas for spring logging. Mikhail planned to reach an abandoned logging settlement from the early 90s, spend the night there, and begin his rounds in the morning. Several intact trailers remained in the settlement where he could shelter from the weather. The first 2 days went according to plan. He reached the familiar spot, inspected the logging sites, marked promising areas on his map, and spent the night in an empty but serviceable trailer. On the third morning, he set out along a route he hadn't checked in 5 years. Too far from the main roads, and the terrain was difficult, marshy even in winter. But these were exactly the sections that needed surveying to determine if it was worth bringing equipment in come spring.
By midday of the third day, Mikhail realized something was wrong. His compass started showing incorrect directions, the needle jerking and spinning as if near a powerful magnetic field. Familiar clearings suddenly turned into unfamiliar valleys, and the ancient spruce trees he'd navigated by for years seemed to have moved to different locations. Instead of the familiar ravine with a stream, he faced a completely strange valley, though according to his map he should have been somewhere else entirely. An experienced woodsman doesn't panic easily, but anxiety began rising from deep in his gut. Years in the forest had taught him to trust his instincts, and they were screaming danger now, though nothing around him appeared threatening. The forest was behaving wrong. Complete silence, not a single sound, even the wind didn't stir the branches. No animal tracks, no birds, no rustling of rodents under the snow. An oppressive emptiness of sound that pressed on his ears. In all his years of work, he'd never experienced anything like this.
The truck suddenly began stalling. First, the engine sputtered and coughed, then died completely in the middle of a snow-covered clearing surrounded by a dense wall of darkening spruce. Mikhail climbed out and checked all the systems, fuel present, battery alive, wires intact, but the machine wouldn't start no matter what. It was as if something invisible had drained all life from it, leaving only a cold pile of metal. The temperature began dropping rapidly. The sun disappeared behind heavy leaden clouds, and the logger realized he had maybe an hour and a half until dark, and spending the night in the cab in this cold was a sure way to never wake up. He urgently needed shelter, any place where he could build a fire and wait until morning. The glove box held emergency supplies, matches, dry fuel, some food, a flashlight with spare batteries. That would be enough if he found a roof over his head. Mikhail grabbed his backpack, axe, and headed in what seemed the most promising direction, though in this cursed forest, nothing.
After walking about a kilometer through deep, loose snow, pushing through bushes and deadfall, Mikhail saw something that made him freeze in place. In thick spruce forest, where every map showed impassable thicket, stood a large residential trailer, typical of old logging operations. Apparently abandoned, shutters closed, nobody around, drifts by the porch, but thin smoke rose from the chimney pipe. Someone had been heating it recently. The logger approached closer and listened. Silence. The door stood ajar, creaking in the frosty wind, as if inviting him in. He looked inside and felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with air temperature. Fresh logs crackled in the stove, a kerosene lamp burned on the table, and beside it sat 3 bowls of steaming food, potatoes with meat by the smell. The owner seemed to have just stepped out for a moment and would return any second. Above the table hung a darkened mirror.
"Anyone here?" Mikhail called out, but only silence and the crackling of logs in the stove answered. Cold bit into his bones through his quilted jacket, while inside the trailer it was almost hot from the blazing stove. He stood on the threshold, wrestling with an inner feeling that he shouldn't enter, but common sense won over superstition. Staying outside in such cold meant death, while here was warmth, food, and a roof overhead. Mikhail crossed the threshold, and the door behind him closed softly on its own with a quiet click. The interior was old-fashioned, but well-maintained. Wooden furniture, homespun rag rugs, icons in the corner under the ceiling, a kerosene lamp casting soft yellowish light. Everything suggested people lived here permanently, though by all logic of life there shouldn't be a living soul for many kilometers. The logger removed his backpack, undressed, hung his jacket on a hook by the door. He settled onto a wide bench by the stove, feeling warmth gradually return to his frozen hands and feet.
Sitting by the stove, Mikhail looked around more carefully. Ancient tools hung on the walls, a 2-man saw, axes, strange implements clearly not from modern logging equipment. In the corner stood a massive chest bound with iron straps with a heavy lock. On shelves, wooden dishes, jars of provisions, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. It smelled of smoke, old wood, and something else, herbal, resinous, not quite familiar. The smell wasn't unpleasant, just unusual, as if from another time. Exhaustion hit all at once as soon as his body warmed up. Mikhail couldn't remember the last time he'd been so worn out. Apparently the nervous strain from wandering the forest had taken its toll. His eyes began closing on their own. He decided to doze a bit until the trailer's owner returned, so he could thank him for shelter and explain the situation. He lay down on the bench, using his backpack as a pillow.
The last thing he remembered was the steady crackling of logs in the stove and shadows dancing on the walls from the lamp flame. He was awakened by creaking floorboards and quiet muttering in an incomprehensible language coming from somewhere deep in the trailer. Mikhail opened his eyes sharply and sat up on the bench, peering into the half-darkness. By the stove, with his back to him, stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, in a worn homespun shirt and dark pants tucked into felt boots. The man was whispering to himself, stirring coals with a poker. Then he turned, and Mikhail saw his face, weathered, covered with a thick beard, eyes dark and deep as pools. "Ah, our guest is awake," he said in a low voice with a noticeable dialect accent drawing out his vowels. "We thought you'd frozen completely. Good thing you found the way here. Not everyone can." Mikhail stood, feeling awkward. "Sorry for coming in without permission. Got lost, truck broke down. Thought I'd wait for the owners." "Come now, what apologies?" The man waved dismissively. "Law of the taiga. Every traveler is a welcome guest. Name's Potap. Been living here a long while, watching over the forest. Sit at the table. Eat after you..."
Mikhail sat at the table where Potap placed wooden cups with something dark and fragrant, herbal brew by the smell. The food in the bowls still steamed, as if just prepared, though it had been sitting here before the logger arrived. This made no sense, but hunger won out. Mikhail hadn't eaten since morning, and it was now late evening. The host sat across from him, poured himself a cup, took a sip, never taking his eyes off his guest. "Tell me, you're not afraid to walk the taiga alone?" Potap asked, smirking into his beard. "They say unclean things dwell in these forests, especially in the northern sectors. All sorts of forest spirits, shapeshifters." "I'm not superstitious," Mikhail replied, though uncertainty sounded in his voice. Something about this man made him nervous. Maybe the too intense stare, or maybe the fact that he hadn't blinked once during the entire conversation. "Is that so?" Potap drawled. "Non-believer, then?"
Without waiting for an answer, Potap threw open the chest lid, and in the dim lamplight, Mikhail saw something that made him forget about food. Inside, on red velvet, lay a book. Enormous, ancient, in a cracked leather cover with incomprehensible symbols. The pages were yellowed, tattered, covered in cramped handwriting in some archaic language resembling Old Church Slavonic, but not quite. Next to the book lay other objects, bundles of dried roots, stones with carved signs, amulets made from bones and claws. "Look at this," Potap said, carefully lifting the book. "It's called the Book of Knowledge, ancient, passed down from my grandfathers. Written in it are answers to all the world's mysteries. Want to cure diseases? It's here. Want to know where treasure's buried? Written here. Want to understand what will happen tomorrow or in 10 years? Open it and read." He looked meaningfully at the logger. "But the book isn't given freely to anyone. You must earn the right to it." Mikhail felt his heart beat faster. Such a book would solve all his problems. He could learn how to help his sick mother, how to find...
"What's the price?" Mikhail asked cautiously, intuition telling him there's no such thing as a free lunch. Potap smirked, and in that smirk flashed something inhuman. Too many teeth, too sharp fangs. "Nothing special," he answered, sitting back at the table. "Just play one ancient game with me. It's called riddles. I ask you 3 riddles, you solve them. Solve all 3 before dawn, the book is yours. Don't solve them, you stay here with me forever. Become a guardian. Watch over the forest." He leaned back on the bench, crossing his arms. "Simple riddle game. What's so hard?
You've got the brains for it. I can see it in your eyes." The logger mentally calculated. 3 riddles until dawn. That's 8 or 9 hours. He'd always been sharp, did well in school, read books. Besides, riddles weren't physical labor or danger, just thinking. And the book. Such a book would change his entire life. "What if I refuse?" Mikhail asked.
Greed and curiosity defeated caution. "I agree," Mikhail nodded, and in that instant realized he'd made a mistake. As soon as the word left his lips, the trailer went dark. The lamp extinguished, the fire in the stove turned to cold embers, and only weak moonlight penetrated through cracks in the shutters. Potap began changing right before his eyes. His figure stretched, became taller and broader. His back hunched. Thick fur emerged from under his shirt. His face distorted, nose elongated into an animal muzzle. Long fangs grew from his jaw. His hands transformed into powerful paws with black claws, and a long tail appeared from under his pants. His eyes glowed in the darkness with yellow fire, cold and ancient. The creature that had seemed human a minute ago straightened to full height, its head touching the ceiling. This was a shapeshifter, master of the forest, the very devil the old man whispered about. His voice became hoarse, with a growl. "The game has begun, human. You have until dawn. 3 riddles, 3 trials. Solve them."
Mikhail remained alone in the cold, dark trailer where the only light source was his wristwatch dial. 9 in the evening, 8 hours until dawn. He grabbed the flashlight from his backpack and turned it on. The beam of light revealed an empty room from the darkness. The bowls of food had vanished, the chest was closed, and only that book lay on the table. The logger approached it, but didn't dare open it. Intuition told him not to touch it until he'd won. Suddenly, from the darkness, as if from the air itself, came Potap's voice, distorted, inhuman. "Hear the first riddle, human. What on earth is strongest? Harder than stone, tougher than steel? What topples kings from thrones and grinds palaces to sand? What turns forests into swamps and mountains into plains? Think until midnight. If you can't answer by 12 o'clock, I'll take your memory. You'll forget who you are and where you're from." The voice fell silent, leaving only echoing silence. Mikhail sat at the table, head in his hands. Harder than stone, tougher than steel. What could be stronger? Iron? No, iron rusts and breaks.
He began going through options one by one. Fire? Fire is indeed powerful, but it doesn't turn forests into swamps. Water? Water erodes stone, but not fast enough to destroy a palace in one king's lifetime. Earthquake? But how can an earthquake be stronger than stone if it passes through stone itself? Minutes dragged by agonizingly slowly. Mikhail paced from corner to corner, trying to concentrate, but his thoughts scattered. He felt the answer was nearby, on the tip of his tongue, but couldn't quite grasp it. He remembered fairy tales he'd read as a child, proverbs, sayings. Time heals. Time will tell. Tested by time. Time! Of course, time! Time is the strongest thing in the world. It grinds stones to sand, turns forests into swamps over centuries, topples kingdoms and empires, wears down the hardest steel. Nothing can withstand time. He exhaled with relief and spoke loudly into the darkness. The answer is time.
The clock showed 5 minutes to midnight. Mikhail felt a surge of strength. He'd solved the first riddle, meaning he could solve the rest. But the joy was premature. The voice sounded again from the darkness,
this time more ominous. "Hear the second riddle, and this one's harder. What does man love more than life itself? Fear more than death? The dead feed on this. The living, having eaten, die. The rich have none of it at all, while the poor are rich with it. Think until 3 in the morning. Can't solve it? I'll take your heart. You'll wander the forest empty, without feelings or emotions." The voice disappeared, leaving the logger in complete bewilderment. This riddle was completely unlike the first. What can you love more than life? Does anything more important than life even exist? And how can the dead eat anything? He started pacing the trailer again, going through options. Love? But the dead don't feed on love. Money? The rich have money, not the opposite. Power? Fame? Nothing fit. He felt panic.
Mikhail forced himself to calm down and think logically. He needed to break down the riddle piece by piece. What does man love more than life? This must be something abstract, not physical. Fear more than death? But death is the greatest fear. What could be scarier? The dead feed on this. Metaphor, of course, the dead don't eat, so they exist because of it? The living, having eaten, die. Meaning, if a living person gets this, they stop being alive? The rich have none of it. The poor are rich with it. What don't the rich have? Problems? Worries? But the poor have plenty of problems. No, that's not it. He sat on the bench, clutching his head in his hands. Think. What don't the rich have that the poor do? Debts? No, rich people have debts too. Free time? No, the rich have plenty of time. And then it hit him. Nothing. The rich have nothing, meaning they need nothing, they have everything. And the poor are rich with nothing. They have nothing. The dead feed on nothing because they're in oblivion. The living, receiving nothing, die, cease to exist.
Man loves nothing more than life. Sounds strange, but in some philosophical sense, peace, emptiness, absence of struggle. Some people truly seek exactly that. Fears more than death, fears emptiness, oblivion, disappearance. What makes death scary if not that there's nothing after it? It all fits. Mikhail straightened and spoke loudly. The answer is nothing. Nothingness. Silence hung so thick it seemed the air itself had frozen. Then came a long sigh, as if wind had passed through cracks, and the voice sounded with a note of respect. Correct, human. Few can solve this riddle. You have a sharp mind, I see. But the third riddle is the hardest. Many have reached it, but none have solved it. Prepare yourself. The clock showed 2 in the morning. About 5 hours until dawn remained. Mikhail felt exhaustion, but forced himself to stay focused. 2 riddles behind him, 1 left. The hardest, as Potap had warned. He drank water from his flask, washed his face with snow.
The voice sounded again, this time very close, as if the creature stood right behind him. Hear the third riddle, human, and listen carefully, because I won't repeat it. Who walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at midday, and 3 in the evening? But that's not all. Tell me why they do this, and what happens when night comes. Think until dawn. Can't solve it? I'll take your soul. You'll become my shadow, walk behind me through the forest forever. neither living nor dead." The voice fell silent, and Mikhail was left alone with the world's most famous riddle. He'd known it since childhood. The answer is man. In life's morning, in infancy, crawls on all fours. At midday, in adulthood, walks on two legs. In evening, in old age, walks with a cane, on three. But that's only the first part. Potap had added more. Why does he do this, and what happens at night? Mikhail began thinking, why does man do this? Because he weakens? Because that's the nature of life? And what happens at night? After evening comes night. After old age, what? Death. But that's too simple for the final riddle. Mikhail forced himself to dig deeper. Potap didn't complicate the riddle for nothing. There must be a deeper meaning. Why does man change? Not just because he ages physically. Maybe it's a metaphor for a spiritual journey. Morning, infancy, purity, closeness to earth. Four legs like animals, instincts. Midday, man stands on two legs, becomes rational, separates from nature. Evening, takes a cane, third support, wisdom, knowledge, experience. But that's still not the answer to the second part. What happens at night? He approached the window, looked through a crack between the shutters. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, less than an hour until dawn. He needed to give an answer now, or he'd lose. What happens at night? Man lies down to sleep. Death is sleep, but not the end. After night comes morning again. The circle closes. Rebirth? He remembered ancient beliefs that existed before Christianity. The Slavs believed in reincarnation of the soul, that after death a person returns to the world in a new body. That's it. The wheel of life turns endlessly.
The clock showed 20 to 6 in the morning. The sky outside grew brighter. Dawn approached rapidly. Mikhail realized time was almost up. He had to give an answer or he'd lose. He gathered all his will and spoke loudly into the darkness. The answer is man. In life's morning he crawls on four. At midday walks on two. In evening leans on a cane, 3 legs. He does this because he travels the path from birth to death, from infant weakness through mature strength to elderly frailty. And at night, when death comes, he falls asleep to wake again as an infant in the morning. The cycle closes, the soul returns to the world, the wheel of life turns endlessly. Oppressive silence, long, tense emptiness of sound in which Mikhail heard only his own heartbeat. Then, from the darkness emerged a creature, not entirely beast, not entirely human, something in between. Potap, in his true form, master of the forest, ancient spirit, guardian of the boundary between worlds. He looked at the logger with glowing yellow eyes, and in that gaze was something new. Respect. Correct.
The creature extended a furry paw, and in it materialized that same book in its cracked leather cover. Mikhail took it with trembling hands. The book was heavy and cold, as if just pulled from ice. The pages rustled on their own, opening to different chapters. He saw diagrams, drawings, texts in incomprehensible languages, formulas, maps, knowledge of the entire world collected in one place. With such a book, he could become anything: healer, scholar, wealthy man,
profit. But when his fingers touched the cover, he heard whispers, quiet, multiple, coming as if from the book itself. Voices of those who'd once possessed it. And they all said one thing: "Don't open, don't read, give it back." Potap smirked, baring fangs. The book isn't simple, human. Every piece of knowledge in it was paid for with blood and suffering. Learn how to cure your mother, you'll fall ill yourself. Learn where treasure's buried, you'll lose what's more precious than money. Read the future, you'll lose the present. Knowledge is a curse.
Mikhail stood in the cold trailer, clutching the book, thoughts racing through his head. His mother was sick, no money for proper treatment. He could open the book, find the recipe that would save her. But the voices warned every piece of knowledge would cost something. He remembered an ancient proverb, know too much, age too fast. He remembered stories of people who sold their souls for knowledge, and not one of them was happy. Sorcerers, black magicians, alchemists, they all ended the same way, alone, cursed, tormented. But what if there's another path? What if his mother could be cured by ordinary doctors, just need to find the money? What if happiness isn't in knowing everything, but in living simply, honestly, not breaking the laws of the world? He looked at Potap, and the creature nodded as if reading his thoughts. The choice is yours, human. You can take the book and doom yourself to an eternal search for answers that will only generate new questions. Or you can leave it here and walk away free. The road home is already open. Mikhail took a deep breath. The decision came hard, but he knew which was right.
The logger held out the book. "Take it back," he said firmly. "I don't want this knowledge. I'll manage on my own, like my fathers and grandfathers did, with my own labor, my own hands, not meddling where humans shouldn't go." Potap took the book, and across his bestial muzzle slid a smile, this time not sinister, but almost kind. "Wise choice, human. Few refuse what they desired. You passed the real test. The riddles tested your mind, but temptation tested your soul, and you prevailed." He began changing back. The fur disappeared, claws retracted, the muzzle became a human face again. In a minute, Potap stood before Mikhail again, an ordinary man in a homespun shirt. Only his eyes remained the same, ancient, wise, inhuman. "Go," he said, nodding toward the door. "Your truck awaits. It'll start without problems. The road will lead to familiar places. And I'll stay here a while longer, watch over the forest. Maybe I'll meet someone else who wants to take the trials." Mikhail gathered his backpack.
The logger stepped outside. Dawn painted the sky in pink and golden tones. The cold hid his face, but this was ordinary, honest cold, not the mystical chill of yesterday. The forest around had also changed, became ordinary, familiar. A clearing opened by itself, showing a clear path. He walked along it for about 20 minutes and saw his Ural standing exactly where it had stalled. Mikhail approached the cab, turned the ignition key, not really hoping the engine would start. But the machine obediently rumbled to life, as if there'd been no breakdown at all. He turned around and drove back toward the settlement. The GPS worked normally. The compass showed the right direction. The road was well worn and familiar.
as if yesterday's wandering had been a dream. But Mikhail knew it wasn't a dream. His hand still remembered the weight of the book. His ears heard the whispers of cursed voices. His eyes had seen Potap's transformation. It was real. He'd met the master of the forest and survived. More than that,
But a week later, unusual things began happening that convinced him the encounter was real and had left its mark. His mother called from the district hospital with news. She'd been accepted into the regional clinic under a federal program. Treatment free, best doctors. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. He was being promoted to foreman with a decent salary increase, plus housing in the settlement. And a month after that, he helped find a missing tourist who'd been searched for 3 days. He was just walking through the forest and suddenly felt need to turn left into a marshy hollow where nobody would go willingly. And sure enough, there in a ravine lay a man with a broken leg, barely alive. They saved him thanks to Mikhail. As if higher powers had rewarded him for the right choice, for not succumbing to the temptation of forbidden knowledge. But strangest of all, after that night, he began feeling the forest differently, could predict where he'd encounter an animal, could find his way in the thickest forest as if something guided him, sensed weather changes 2 days ahead, never wrong.
Young loggers asked to partner with him to learn his wilderness wisdom. Mikhail became a legend among foresters throughout the region. He was invited to search parties when people got lost in the forest, and he always found them in time, as if an invisible thread connected him with those who needed help. The only reminder of that encounter was disturbing dreams. Every full moon, he dreamed of the trailer, the kerosene lamp, and a figure in the doorway. Potap stood at the threshold and nodded silently, and in that nod was recognition. You passed the test. You're worthy. Sometimes in dreams, other figures appeared beside him, those who hadn't passed, who chose the book and remained in the forest forever. They looked at Mikhail with envy and longing, and he began noticing that in the forest he seemed protected. Bears gave him wide berth. Wolves didn't attack. Even vipers slithered off the path. Once in winter he fell through ice on a river, but some force pushed him back up as if something pushed from below. The forest had accepted him as its own. He'd become part of this ancient world where right choices are rewarded and wrong ones punished. But this reward wasn't gold or knowledge, but something greater.
Several years passed, and Mikhail began finding other lost people in the forest. Geologists, hunters, tourists, officials in SUVs who'd gotten themselves lost. Always in time. Always at the critical moment when they could still be saved, but a bit longer and it would have been too late. He never knew in advance where to go. Just at some moment he'd feel, need to turn here, walk over there, look beyond that hill, and there was always a person. Freezing, injured, lost, but alive. People began calling him the guardian angel of the Ural Taiga. Newspapers wrote articles about him. Television came to film stories. But Mikhail avoided fame, didn't like talking about himself. He simply said, "It's my job. I know this forest, every trail." And only once, when a young journalist persistently asked how he managed to find people where no one else looked, he said, "The forest shows me. You just need to know how to listen." The journalist didn't understand, thought it was a metaphor about experience and intuition, but Mikhail meant it literally. The forest really did show him. The rustle of leaves formed hints.
Wind pushed him in the right direction. Birds led the way. The connection formed that
Sometimes, sitting by a campfire during long winter evenings, Mikhail pondered what had really happened that night. Was it a real encounter with an ancient forest spirit, or a hallucination from exhaustion and cold? Does the Book of Knowledge actually exist, or was it a metaphor for temptation? He didn't know for certain, and no longer tried to find a definitive answer. What mattered was different. He'd made a choice, and that choice changed his life for the better. Not money, not power, not secret knowledge made him happy, but the ability to help others, to feel connected to nature, to be part of something greater than himself. He'd realized what many never understand their whole lives. True wealth isn't in what you can take, but in what you can give. Ancient wisdom, worn thin with use, but until that night, he hadn't truly felt it. Now he felt it with every cell. Perhaps this was the real knowledge the book provides, not recipes and schemes, but understanding simple.
5 years after that encounter, Mikhail found himself in those parts again. Work brought him he needed to check old logging areas before a major harvest. He'd long hesitated to return to the place where the trailer stood, but curiosity won out. He walked the familiar path, and sure enough, the trailer stood in place. Decrepit, leaning, obviously uninhabited, windows broken, door torn from hinges, empty inside, no stove, no furniture, no table, just bare walls and rotting floor. Mikolai stood on the threshold, remembering that night. He smiled. So it had been real after all. And then he heard rustling behind him. He turned. On the clearing edge stood a man, tall, in a worn homespun shirt with a thick beard. Potap. They looked at each other silently, and words weren't needed. The ancient spirit nodded with respect. Mikolai nodded back. Potap turned and walked into the forest, and after a few steps his figure dissolved among the trees, as if he'd never been there. The logger realized this was farewell.
Mikhail began passing his experience to the young, not telling them about meeting Potap, of course, but explaining principles of working in the forest. He taught them to respect the taiga, not to litter, not to make noise unnecessarily, not to cut more than needed. He taught them to feel the forest, not just walk through it. Some understood what he was talking about. Others nodded but didn't listen. One guy, Igor, proved especially capable. He too felt something in the forest, some connection. Once he admitted, "Mikhail, sometimes I hear the trees whispering. Is that normal, or should I see a doctor?" The logger smiled. "It's normal, Igor. Means the forest has accepted you. Listen to what it whispers, but never demand from the forest more than it's willing to give. And if you meet something suspicious, a cabin where there shouldn't be one, a person who offers you a deal, think 3 times before agreeing." Igor looked at him in surprise. "You've encountered it?" Mikhail said nothing, and the young man understood everything. From then on, they didn't return to this topic, but a special trust formed between them. The trust of
Mikhail began passing his experience to the young, not telling them about meeting Potap, of course, but explaining principles of working in the forest. He taught them to respect the taiga, not to litter, not to make noise unnecessarily, not to cut more than needed. He taught them to feel the forest, not just walk through it. Some understood what he was talking about. Others nodded but didn't listen. One guy, Igor, proved especially capable. He too felt something in the forest, some connection. Once he admitted, "Mikhail, sometimes I hear the trees whispering. Is that normal, or should I see a doctor?" The logger smiled. "It's normal, Igor. means the forest has accepted you. Listen to what it whispers, but never demand from the forest more than it's willing to give. And if you meet something suspicious, a cabin where there shouldn't be one, a person who offers you a deal, think 3 times before agreeing. Igor looked at him in surprise. You've encountered it? Mikhail said nothing, and the young man understood everything. From then on, they didn't return to this topic, but a special trust formed between.
Mikhail heard stories from other loggers, geologists, hunters. Not often, but regularly, someone would tell of suspicious encounters in the forest. Someone saw a hut on chicken legs. Someone met an old man offering to show where gold was buried. Someone heard voices calling them to leave the path. Most dismissed it. I was drunk, tired, hallucination. But some stories sounded too detailed, too truthful to be invention. And Mikhail understood. Potap wasn't alone. Different spirits lived in the forests, different guardians, each with their own trials, their own rules, their own rewards. The taiga is vast, and in its depths remains what has vanished from cities and settlements. Ancient powers, ancient agreements, ancient laws. The modern world, with its technology and science, thinks it has conquered nature. But nature doesn't submit. It simply retreats into the depths, to inaccessible places, and there
To young loggers, Mikhail always said the same thing. If you see something that shouldn't exist according to maps, a cabin, a trail, a signpost, stop and think whether you need to go there. If you meet a person in a deserted place who behaves suspiciously, asks strange questions, or makes unusual offers, remember, this might not be a person. Never agree to deals immediately without thinking. Any deal in the forest has consequences, and not always the ones promised. Don't take from the forest what doesn't belong to you by right. Not mushrooms from someone else's clearing, not stones from ancient shrines, not artifacts from abandoned places. If someone offers you something too good to be true, it's either not true or it's true, but with a price they're not telling you about. And most important, respect the forest. Don't litter, don't make noise, don't cut just because. The forest is alive, it remembers, and it can be grateful or vengeful. The old men spoke truth when they warned about this. Few just listened to them.
Mikhail thought a lot about the difference between knowledge and wisdom after that encounter. The book contained knowledge, facts, recipes, answers, but it didn't provide understanding of how to use this knowledge without harm. That was the trap. A person received answers to questions, but didn't understand the consequences of applying them. That's why all owners of the book became unhappy. They knew too much, but understood too little, didn't realize the price of each answer. But wisdom isn't accumulation of information. Wisdom is understanding the limits of your knowledge and the ability to live in harmony with the unknown, accepting that you don't need to know everything. You don't need to know the future to live right in the present. You don't need to know all the world's secrets to be happy. It's enough to know simple things, how to work honestly, how to love those close to you, how to respect nature, how to help people. That's quite enough for a worthy life. Mikhail refused the book, not because he was afraid or didn't want knowledge. He refused because he realized
Mikhail's life truly improved after that encounter. His mother was cured, she lived another 20 years, healthy and vigorous. His promotion allowed him to buy a house in the settlement, arrange his life. He married a good woman, a teacher from the local school, had 2 children. His daughter trained as a doctor, his son followed in his father's footsteps, became a forester. An ordinary, simple life, without upheavals or dramas, but filled with meaning, warmth, connections with loved ones. That was true wealth. But what if he'd taken the book, learned healing secrets, perhaps would have become a famous healer, but lost something in exchange? Maybe health, maybe family, maybe peace of mind. The curse of knowledge is that for every answer, you pay with part of yourself, and eventually only knowledge remains of the person, while the person himself disappears. Mikhail avoided this fate. He remained himself, a simple logger who knows the forest well, loves his family, and helps people. You don't need to be a hero or genius to live happily. You just need to be a person.
Over the years, the story of Mikhail grew into legend. People said he could talk to animals, that bears obeyed him, that he found people by smell like a dog, that he never felt cold, even in 40 below weather. All this was exaggeration, of course. Mikhail was an ordinary person, just with heightened intuition and deep understanding of the forest. But people need heroes, need legends, especially in small settlements where life flows measured and monotonous. And Mikhail became such a legend. Children listened to stories about him before bed. Adults told his tales to visitors. Old men nodded, "We had such a man, Mikhail. The forest loved him." He himself treated this calmly, without pride but also without irritation. He understood that people create myths to explain the unexplainable. And there was plenty unexplainable in his life for those who didn't know the truth. But he told the truth to no one. First, they wouldn't believe it. Second, some secrets are better kept to yourself, not from pride or greed, but from respect for the powers he'd encountered.
The main lesson Mikhail drew from meeting the master of the forest was a lesson about the nature of choice. Life constantly puts us at crossroads, big and small, important and insignificant. But some choices determine our entire future path. And what matters isn't which choice you make, but why you make it, what motives guide you. If you choose from fear, that's one path. If from greed, another. If from love, a third. If from wisdom, a fourth. Mikhail refused the book, not because he was afraid and not because he didn't want knowledge. He refused because he realized true wisdom isn't in knowing answers, but in the ability to ask the right questions and accept life as it is, without trying to control and predict everything. The universe is wiser than any person. The forest is more ancient than any civilization. And when you accept this, stop fighting the current and start flowing with it, then life becomes easier, not simpler, but easier, because you stop resisting the natural order of things.
We live in a world where science has explained almost everything. Where GPS shows coordinates accurate to a meter. Where satellites see every corner of the planet. Where it seems no mysteries remain. But this is an illusion. Mysteries exist. They just hide, not in geographical points, but in places where technology can't reach. In the depths of wild forest where no roads go. In human hearts where no scanner can look. In moments of choice when it's decided what kind of person you'll be. The ancient powers legends speak of haven't disappeared anywhere. They simply retreated from territories where they're not respected. But where nature has kept its power, where man is guest, not master, there these powers still live and act. And encountering them is possible, not for everyone, but for those who venture far enough or those they themselves choose for testing. Mikhail was chosen.
Mikhail's story isn't unique. Throughout Russia, in remote forests, mountains, steppes, people encounter something inexplicable. Not everyone speaks of it, many fear mockery. Some aren't sure themselves if it was real. But encounters happen, and each encounter changes a person, makes them either wiser or more miserable, depending on their choice. If you ever happen to encounter something similar, remember this story. Think more than once before agreeing to a deal. Don't chase quick solutions to complex problems. True wisdom comes through experience, through mistakes, through years of living. It can't be obtained from a book or bought with gold. It can only be earned by your actions, your decisions, your willingness to grow and change. The Hidden Mysteries channel collects such stories about encounters with the inexplicable, about choices that change destiny, about how the world is far more complex and amazing than it first seems. If this story touched something inside you, if you feel there's truth in it, support us with a subscription. In the comments, share whether you've encountered situations where the right choice in a difficult moment led to unexpected consequences. Your stories can inspire other people to make the right decisions, because each of us sooner or later stands at a crossroads where we must choose between the easy path and the right one.